Ian Maatsen's Chelsea career is over before it even really began, if we're all being honest. He is leaving Chelsea Football Club after a deal has now been agreed between Chelsea and Aston Villa for the young Dutch left-back. And I am going to tell you why there is a slight, ever so slight, silver lining to this deal in this video. We are also going to speak about the Michael Olise developments as he edges potentially closer to a move away from Crystal Palace, with Chelsea very, very keenly interested. And I'm also going to clear up for you guys a few of my recent comments on Enzo Fernandez. So without any further ado, let's get into it. But before we do that, people, this is the Joey Knight podcast. If you are new around here at the end of the video, if you like the content and you want to see more from myself, please do me a massive favor, hit that subscribe button. We are closing in on 100,000 subscribers, which is actually crazy. So if you want to be a part of this community, please hit the subscribe button, smash the like on this video. Let's get into it. Right, first of all, absolutely gutted that we are selling Ian Maatsen. It is not a transfer that I at all wanted to happen. He's a great player. He's a player that I think will will stay at the top level, obviously competing in a Champions League final last season for Borussia Dortmund, and it looks like he's going to be playing Champions League football again next season. And ultimately, on the apparent agreed price for Ian Maatsen, which we're not exactly sure on, it could be 35 million, it could be 40 million. I'm going to be honest, I think we're selling him at a snip price for that sort of money, because I think that when you look at the value of left-backs in the market, if you look at the price we paid for Cucurella, some people could argue that we overpaid for him, but I think that Ian Maatsen could be going slightly on the cheap in this one. I have no doubt that right now his market value is between 35 and 40 million. However, I do think that next season that market value could significantly increase. You've got to remember, Chelsea played about 51 games or something this season. Next season, you can almost certainly add on another 15 games or so to that, with obviously the Europa Conference League. Then you look at our left back options. Now, I understand that Marc Cucurella has very much nailed down that position and made it his own for the time being, at least in my opinion. But what we've also got to look at is our two starting left backs, our two senior left backs at the club, bearing in mind that we don't want to see Levi Colwill over there. We have let go of Lewis Hall, which leaves us with Ian Maatsen, which obviously is on the way out, Ben Chilwell and Marc Cucurella. Now, if you look at Ben Chilwell and Marc Cucurella last season, Ben Chilwell never really hit the form that we had seen from him under Thomas Tuchel and other managers gone by, and he was sidelined through most of the season with injury, if we're being honest. Cucurella had two separate stints, I should say, where he was out of the first team injured. So being that we've got a whole load more games, even if both them boys were fit next season, you could still potentially see Maatsen getting a few minutes. And if the injury record, touch wood it doesn't, but if the injury record stays the same as we've seen this season, I think you would have seen Ian Maatsen get a lot of game time under Maresca, and therefore ultimately increase his value, or at least hold his value. And in the meantime, we use him, which could be a pivotal season for us when we hopefully edge back towards getting Champions League football. But ultimately, he will be in the Champions League next season, potentially with Aston Villa. Now, when I saw Maatsen become a key figure for Mauricio Pochettino's Chelsea in pre-season last year, I was so excited, because you had a left back there with an eye for a goal, an eye for an assist, almost, shades of Ben Chilwell. And I felt that in the 23-24 season, we would have seen a lot of Ian Maatsen, that he would be a big player for us. I thought that he would probably move ahead. This was my initial thoughts. I thought that he would probably move ahead of Cucurella in the pecking order. Sounds mad now. I thought he'd be playing back up to Chile. But ultimately, Cucurella comes in. He locks down the position. And then, going forward with Cucurella, with the newfound confidence that I have for Cucurella now, it does somewhat soften the blow that Ian Maatsen will be going. But you look at him for Dortmund last season, man, he really, really hit the ground running in the Bundesliga. For Chelsea, he was in the squad for 20 games last season, and he only actually started one. But upon his move to Borussia Dortmund, he was in their squad for 23 games last season, and he started 22 games. So I don't think that there'll be that much of a settling in process. at Villa for Ian Maatsen. I think the level he's been playing at for Borussia Dortmund will be a similar sort of level to what he's playing at for Aston Villa. I'd imagine that he displaces both Moreno and Luca Digne relatively quickly, especially like you look at both those guys being over the age of 30 now. I think Moreno will be turning 32 next season. Digne will be turning 31 next season. Also, they had obviously rotated minutes between the two of them. So I just think that you're gonna see Ian Maatsen come in and get a starting berth there. Now, I personally would have preferred him to have gone back permanently to, well, I would have preferred him to not go at all, but I would have preferred him to have gone back permanently to Borussia Dortmund, because then we don't run the risk, albeit next season, you know, it could be different seasons going on, but at least for next season, we wouldn't run the risk of him rocking up to Stamford Bridge with his new team and coming back to bite us in the arse. But now, potentially, we do run that risk, but there's a little bit of a silver lining here, and that silver lining is that the reason we're running that risk is because if Borussia Dortmund were to have got him, they would have activated his release clause. Now, the word is they didn't even have enough money to activate his release clause. So if you can't pay the 35 million, you're pretty much out of the question, in my opinion, because I think he's worth more than that. But the release clause actually expired last week. So we've done this deal with Aston Villa, and potentially we're paying or receiving maybe another 5 million, that might be with add-ons or whatever, to run the risk of him coming back to bite us in the arse and actually strengthening a direct rival next season. Also, the conversation paths now being open between us and Aston Villa might then help us going forward in the John Duran deal. And I would like to speak about John Duran today, but there's not really much progression that I can speak about on that one with John Duran. It's come out in the last few days, isn't it, that Chelsea were in talks with an unnamed Aston Villa player. Have you heard this? An unnamed Aston Villa player that we could potentially be looking to bring to Stamford Bridge. Now, I would rule out any of the midfielders. Who are they losing? Douglas Luiz, isn't it? So I couldn't see a John McGinn, anyone like that going. Obviously, you know, Buendia, Bailey, we've got good options on the wings, and obviously it looks like our prime focus is on Michael Olise, so I don't see either of those two deals being that likely either. Ollie Watkins, are we really looking at bringing in Ollie Watkins? I'm not too sure. I'm really not too sure. So I don't know whether that was like smoke and mirrors and all of a sudden, you know, they just don't want to name John Duran, but that's clearly who we're going for. And clearly, if Ian Maatsen is going to Aston Villa, and as I say, the conversation paths are open and it's a smooth process and it's not too much of a tricky deal, maybe Aston Villa will go, do you know what? Rather than exert ourselves and, you know, potentially shoot ourselves in the foot dealing with other clubs that we don't know we have that sort of relationship with. If the relationship's good there with Chelsea, we can just get a deal done. And then we strengthen them, they strengthen us. Everyone's a winner. Potentially, who knows? Michael Olise. Let's give a quick little timeline because I've covered the Olise thing a couple of times now. But last summer, we were in for Olise. A deal looked to be edging closer until right at the death when he signs a new contract with Crystal Palace. We go in, by the way, again for an unnamed Manchester City player as a backup to Olise, and that man ends up turning out to be Cole Palmer, and we absolutely have it off with Cole Palmer. However, despite Olise penning a new deal at Selhurst Park with Crystal Palace, it is somewhat believed that this is a deal that would make a future move slightly easier to navigate, because then they're putting in a apparent £60 million release clause into the deal, and in the meantime, Olise bagging higher wages, which we believed to have been about 100 grand a week last season. Now this season, just gone, he spends two fairly big chunks of time out with hamstring injuries. Concerning, really, when you're a Chelsea fan and all your best players are missing 24/7. When he is on the pitch, though, he's pretty prolific, mate. He gets 16 goal involvements in 19 games, but when you actually look at the games he started, there was only 14 of those. So 16 goal involvements in 14 starts, that does not make for bad reading. Season finishes, once again, like last summer, Olise is in high demand, and it feels like the 22-year-old will now look to join a bigger club. However, Palace are also in the race to sign, or I should say, to keep Olise. as they're reportedly set to offer him a new contract just 12 months after the last. Now, as I said, we're hearing that Olise is earning, 100 grand a week. So if Palace are offering him a new contract, realistically, are they going to offer any less than 150 grand a week? You'd think 150, 140 grand a week-ish, maybe more. And the reports are that Chelsea are only willing to sign players this summer that fit in the 150k per week wage cap. So we've got Chelsea and 150 grand a week wage cap. Well, we don't, do we? Because if you look at our squad, we've got players that are earning well over 150 grand per week. So on over 150 grand a week, you've obviously got Marco Correa, 175 grand a week, Enzo, 180, Christopher Nkunku, 195, Chile's on 200, Wesley Fofana's on 200, Reece James is on 250, and Raheem Sterling is on 325. So that makes 7 players on our books. Is it 7? Or is that 5? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, fine. 7 players on our books that are earning over 150 grand at the minute. And to be fair, this wage cap idea may have come in last summer, because when you actually look at that, you've got the likes of Moises Caicedo on 150, Cole Palmer on 75 grand a week, Nicholas Jackson on 65, Romeo Lavia on 45. So I think the problem is, unless Chelsea are offering, 200 grand a week for Olise, really, I honestly don't think that we'll actually get him. And that's a bit gutting, really, because we have very much, to use a Love Island reference, put all our eggs in one basket, I feel, when it comes to Michael Olise. But I don't think that signing Olise is absolutely definitively make or break for Chelsea's chances next season. That also doesn't mean I class him as like a luxury signing, by the way. Obviously, he's a great dribbler of the ball. He'll fit nicely into Enzo Maresca's system. I've spoke about this in a video before, but Enzo Maresca really relied on his wide players being able to carry the ball, dribble the ball, take men out of play, beat a man, and obviously open up spaces. If you look at the 2 wingers he had at Leicester last season, his 2 predominant wingers, they were ranked first and second in the Championship out of all players, not just Leicester players, out of every player in the Championship when it came on to successful take-ons last season. So I think Olise would fit into that system very well. Actually beating a man, dribbling past a man with the ball, you might argue he's a little bit better than Cole Palmer. Noni Madueke is the only one that week in, week out, you can rely on doing that for us. Raheem Sterling can beat a man with the ball, but we don't know whether he's going to be here, and he does blow hot and cold. Michael Olise is not only dribbling the ball, he's very good at crossing, wins a lot of set pieces, he'll take them set pieces himself a lot of the time, scoring some free kicks on the way, and he's obviously showed great link-up play this season with his Palace teammates, most notably obviously Eze, Mateta. And you look at Chelsea's front line, you look at the link-up play that started to develop over the season, and especially in the run-in of last season, and you could very much see Olise fitting into that. Now, the main concern is you might look at it and you might say, but he plays sort of where Cole Palmer's playing. I think Cole Palmer will play in the midfield or as a 10 next season. But I actually don't know if Olise will leave Crystal Palace this season, because at 22 years old, he's hardly old. And when you look at the way that they finished under Glasner last season, the players they've got as well, Gahey, Wharton, Eze, Mateta, like I mentioned, they could push next season. They could push. They finished last season by battering Man United and Aston Villa. So who's to say, when we've seen teams like, look, I'm not saying they're going to do an Aston Villa. I'm not saying that. But Brighton, potentially, seen them finish in European places. Who's to say Palace can't do it? Who's to say? So, who knows? But the reports coming out today, as of when I'm recording this, Friday, are that maybe we are now looking at a deal that includes a player, Trevor Chalobah. Now, we know Trevor Chalobah is probably going to be on the way out from Stamford Bridge, and I think he would fit like a glove into Crystal Palace. Could potentially be playing alongside an old academy teammate of his in Mark Gahey, who's, having a good campaign at Euro 2024 so far this season. When you look at the market value of Trevor Chalobah potentially being around 25 million, that could come off the top of the deal. Maybe. Chalobah is only on 50 grand a week, so it's not like you're knocking a huge chunk off of of the wage bill if Trevor Chalobah goes the other way. And when we're looking at the wage bill, by the way, sorry, I'm sort of detouring here, but when we're looking at it, that 150 wage cap, that's surely a result of the huge wages that we're actually already paying to the likes of Romelu Lukaku, to the likes of Raheem Sterling. So surely, if we can manage to get some of them off the wage bill, then our wage structure could be slightly loosened when it comes to getting Olise in. I'm not saying I want to pay Raheem Sterling wages, which is, 325 grand a week, to Michael Olise. I definitely don't want to do that. I'm also not saying that he should only be on 75 grand a week like Cole Palmer. I think, 180 grand a week for Michael Olise. I think that's about fair, really. The concerning thing for me is when you look at the top highest earners from last season, right? In the Premier League last season, those 5 top highest earners for Chelsea when it comes to Christopher Nkunku, Ben Chilwell, Wesley Fofana, Reece James, and Raheem Sterling, right? Those 5 top 5 earners had a combined 38 league starts in the Premier League out of a possible 190 starts last season. So that's not great. And actually, that's probably holding our transfer plans back this season massively. But either way, Trevor Chalobah, he's going to be a great signing for Crystal Palace if he does go there. I think he'd start all the time for Crystal Palace. My gut feeling, as of today, Friday the 21st, do we get Michael Olise? I don't know, man. I think it's in the balance. I really do think this is 50-50. So let me know your thoughts in the comment section. Do we get Michael Olise? Do we need Michael Olise? And would you take the Trevor Chalobah swap plus 40 odd million or whatever for Michael Olise? Would you break the wage structure? Some people don't care. 20 years ago, no one cared about the wages, did they? But clearly in today's day and age of football podcasting and whatnot, people do seem to care about the wages. So would you break that wage structure to bring Michael Olise in? How much would you put him on? Finally, I want to clear up some of my Enzo Fernandez comments because I'm going to be honest, right? Listen, mate, it actually upset me to hear that I had annoyed a few of you when I had spoke about Enzo Fernandez in a recent podcast. So let me clear it up. Myself and Josh did a podcast speaking about the return of Enzo Fernandez, who obviously recently ran out for Argentina. Impressive display, played 75 minutes, and obviously he wasn't like slowly integrated back into competitive football, in my opinion. It's not like he had, got 10 minutes here, 5 minutes there, whatever. He literally came in, played 75 odd minutes for Argentina. His numbers from that game were pretty impressive. He had a good game, but there has since been an Argentina game, I think it was last night, and he stayed on the bench, didn't even get off the bench. So that could be a reflection of the tremendous strength in depth that Argentina have, and they don't even need a £100 odd million player like Enzo Fernandez on the pitch in an important game from last night. But it could also be a case of him coming back a little bit too quickly from injury, trying to play when maybe his body isn't completely ready for 75 odd minutes, and then he wasn't fit enough to play the next game. Now, I'll keep this one short and sweet, but in the podcast, I asked the question, I didn't say it, definitely didn't, I asked the question if Enzo Fernandez and Caicedo worked last season as a double pivot. I was suggesting that potentially they didn't work that well as a double pivot, and actually, when you saw Caicedo paired with Conor Gallagher, he had a lot better showings, right? I don't think that's out of the question to ask that question. I also don't think that it's necessarily piling the pressure and the criticism on Enzo Fernandez for me to suggest that we saw better performances. Now, I did asked the question, I remember this off the top of my head without watching it back, I did ask the question to Josh, is that a coincidence? Is that just a coincidence that our performances ticked up? So it's not like I was saying this is definitively the reason. When Josh suggested that Enzo Maresca wouldn't use Enzo Fernandez as deep as we had seen him at times this season, I then said, would it be unsatisfying next season if he finished the end of next season playing in a more forward role, not playing as defensive under Enzo Maresca, and he only had 5 goals and assists to his name in the league at the end of next season, right? Again, like when you look at other players that potentially play in defensive midfield, and then other players that play further up, I don't think it's being too harsh on Enzo Fernandez to say, does he need more than 5 goals and assists? Like, maybe I am. Maybe I'm wrong here, by the way. I'm just, giving you my thought pattern. I questioned his shooting ability, right? I was in the stands at Stamford Bridge a lot last season, and there was a lot to be admired when it came to Enzo Fernandez's shooting ability. Now, 28% shooting accuracy for Enzo Fernandez last season. I'm not saying it's awful. Caicedo had more at 31%. Gallagher had a lot more at 37%. When you look at other players, Rice, Rodri, Endo from Liverpool, Douglas Luiz, Kobbie Mainoo, Bruno Guimaraes, all registered higher shooting accuracy than Enzo Fernandez. So I personally think it's fair that I address that as an area he needs to work on. That's not me saying he'll never get better. That's not me saying, oh, you know, we've wasted our money on him or anything like that. Those words never came out my lips. I literally suggested that that is an area of his game that he needs to get better at. By the way, I can remember plenty of Chelsea players that have got better at their shooting and other areas of their game. So it's not to discredit him and not to say that he can't do that. I thought it was quite fair. The bit that probably pissed people off the most is when I questioned the speed in which he had come back from the surgery. I did prerequisite it by saying that I'm not a doctor, I've got no medical background or anything like that, and I was literally basing it off guidelines that I'd found on the internet, which is why, if you watch the video back, I never actually stated that he had chosen country over club or vice versa. I did simply ask the question, you know. Personally, this is how I feel conversations run best. You've got to, you know, sometimes you've got to play devil's advocate. Sometimes you've got to ask uncomfortable questions. Otherwise, if it's just two blokes agreeing with each other, how brilliant Enzo is, it doesn't make for a very good podcast, does it? But I do think that people understand that I don't claim to be an expert on these things, you know. I am just a lifelong Chelsea fan who loves the club and wants us to do well. And one man I also want to do well is Enzo Fernandez. So we were exploring the possibilities. I know Josh is very pro Enzo Fernandez and happy with his performances and whatnot. I think there was a bit left to the imagination last season, and I think that we could see more of him. And then we spoke about the hernia issue, other players that had it and whatnot. Why do I feel that he can do better? Because he can be better. He's a quality player. He's got a great eye for a pass. He's got really good vision. He's got the ability to keep the game ticking over, bring other players in. And I also said in that video that he could have played in that Champions League final team instead of Jorginho, and we would have been no worse off. I've also said in many videos that I could see Enzo going and playing for Real Madrid and being a really, really good player for him. So there's no Enzo agenda here, despite one of the top like comments. The podcast was literally to discuss Enzo Fernandez, where his ceiling is, and how Maresca can get the better out of him. But if I upset any of you with my wording in that video, I do apologise, because we are all friends around here. People, let me know your thoughts on Ian Maatsen leaving. Let me know your thoughts on Michael Olise. Obviously, Enzo Fernandez coming back now. How many goals and assists do you lot reckon he's getting next season? Would you be happy with 5, or do you think he does need more than 5? I thought I was being fair, but maybe it's the way I speak, man. Maybe it comes across harsh. Either way, I'm looking forward to reading your comments, and I will try and get back to as many of you as I possibly can. I will see you all in the next one.